It started like any other late night at the office. The fluorescent lights hummed softly, casting long, sterile shadows across the empty cubicles. My desk was littered with the remnants of my dinner, a half-eaten sandwich, a cold soda, and a stack of reports that no one would see until morning. Most nights, I didn't mind being alone. Solitude had a rhythm to it, a kind of quiet comfort in the monotonous hum of the building. But that night, the comfort was gone, replaced by a creeping unease I couldn't shake. The clock on my computer blinked 11:57 p.m., and the office was silent except for the faint buzz of the air conditioning. I packed my bag slowly, feeling the weight of the day settle onto my shoulders. My plan was simple: lock up, take the elevator to the lobby, and head home. But the moment I pressed the elevator call button, something felt off. The metal doors slid open with a reluctant screech, revealing the familiar, cramped interior. The floor indicator flickered erratically. 14. 13. Then paused on 12, before climbing back to 14. I frowned. Elevators occasionally acted up, sure, but this one seemed almost aware. I stepped inside, telling myself I was being paranoid. The doors closed behind me, sealing off the hallway in an unnatural silence. My reflection in the polished metal walls looked back at me, pale and tired. I pressed the button for the lobby, and the elevator shuddered as it began its descent. At first, everything seemed normal. Then came the smell. A cold, metallic stench, like rust mixed with something far fouler, filled the air. I gagged slightly, looking around, but there was no one else there. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. By the time the elevator hit the 10th floor, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. My pulse quickened. I fumbled for my phone and turned on the flashlight, its beam trembling as I shone it across the walls. The metal surfaces reflected distorted shapes, shadows that seemed to stretch toward me with a slow, deliberate hunger. Then I heard it, a faint tapping, rhythmic and low, like fingernails drumming against the elevator ceiling. My heart skipped. I told myself it was just the building settling, maybe a loose panel somewhere, but the sound grew louder, closer, circling me from above. The temperature dropped suddenly. My breath became visible in small clouds, and I shivered despite the office's normally warm air. Something cold brushed past my arm, light as a whisper but undeniable. I spun around, swinging the phone like a weapon, but there was nothing there. The tapping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the walls themselves. I pressed every button in panic, willing the elevator to move faster, to open anywhere, but the cabin remained suspended, defying the laws of mechanics. And then I saw it. Or rather, them. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection maybe, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized the truth. Faces pressed against the elevator walls, pale and twisted, their eyes hollow and black, mouths stretching in grotesque, silent screams. There were dozens of them, hundreds even, impossibly thin and pressed into the steel, moving in ways that no human body could. They weren't real, and yet they were, their presence undeniable. I stumbled back, hitting the side of the elevator, my scream echoing off the metal walls. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice trembling. My own echo mocked me, answering in distorted tones that weren't mine. The elevator shuddered violently, and the indicator jumped erratically. 14. 7. 11. 3. It felt as if the cabin had lost its connection to the world, spinning in a space where time and gravity bent at a will I couldn't comprehend. The faces pressed closer, their empty eyes staring into mine, and I realized they were not trapped, I was. In a desperate move, I pressed the emergency button, hoping the alarm would summon help. Instead of the usual buzz or recorded voice, a whisper slithered through the speaker. "You shouldn't be here. You're not alone. You never were." The words made my blood run cold. I dropped my phone, the light spinning across the walls in frantic arcs. The elevator lurched upward, downward, sideways, or so it felt, and the air grew thick, almost tangible, pressing against my chest. Minutes, or maybe hours, passed. Time had lost meaning in that metal cage. My mind raced, trying to find logic, trying to remember how elevators worked, trying to convince myself I was awake. And then the floor indicator finally stopped. Lobby. Relief surged, but it was fleeting. The doors slid open, revealing not the familiar lobby, but a dim, shadowed void. The ceiling lights flickered weakly, casting twisted shadows across walls that shouldn't exist. The reception desk was gone. The exit doors weren't there. It was just emptiness. And then I heard the laughter. Low, wet, echoing laughter that filled the void and resonated in my skull. It came from all directions, yet I saw no source. The elevator doors began to close behind me, as if the metal box itself were alive, trying to reclaim me. I ran, stumbling through the darkness, my hands brushing walls that weren't quite walls, doors that weren't doors, floors that shifted under my feet like water. The laughter followed, growing louder, more insistent. It was patient. It had been waiting. Somewhere in the void, I felt a presence brush past me, not physical, but a force that made my skin crawl. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. Every instinct screamed to keep moving, to escape, to survive. I turned a corner and froze. A figure stood there, tall and impossibly thin, dressed in a dark, tattered suit. Its face was featureless, smooth, reflecting nothing. It raised a hand slowly, pointing directly at me. I felt its gaze, not eyes, not vision, but awareness, piercing into me, scanning, knowing. My knees buckled, and I fell backward, sliding across a floor that should have been solid but felt liquid under my weight. I scrambled back toward the elevator, hoping it might be a portal, a way out, anything. The doors were half closed, moving with deliberate intent. I dove forward, my fingers gripping the metal just as it sealed completely. Trapped again. The cabin was now silent, save for my ragged breathing and the faint drip of water from somewhere above. I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then, in the reflection of the polished elevator wall, I saw them again. Hundreds of pale faces, some screaming, some grinning, some whispering words I couldn't understand. And among them, a shadow that was not a shadow, moving independently of the others, watching me. I realized, with a horror I cannot describe, that it was smiling. A slow, deliberate smile. The elevator shuddered once more and began to descend. My heart sank as the floor numbers passed faster than possible. 20, 15, 5, 2, 1, 0, but the doors did not open at the lobby. They opened somewhere else entirely, a place that looked like the building, but not the building. Familiar, yet twisted. Shadows stretched impossibly long across the walls. The carpet was dark, soaking wet. The exit doors loomed in the distance, but as I stepped toward them, the reflection in the elevator doors stopped me. It was me. Or a version of me. My face, twisted in silent terror, pressed against the glass from the inside, mouthing words I could not hear. Behind it, the others pressed closer, filling the cabin to the brim. And then, with a sickening realization, I understood, the elevator doesn't just move through floors. It moves through the thin spaces between realities, picking up those foolish enough to ride alone at midnight. And the last ride is never empty. I froze. The doors began to close again. The doors slammed shut with a metallic clang, cutting off the reflection of my doubled self. The elevator shuddered violently, then fell into a heavy, unnatural silence. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my hands shook as I pressed against the cold steel walls, trying to ground myself in reality. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I had no idea which way was safe, or even if safe existed in this place. The faint hum of the elevator, once mechanical, now thrummed with a sinister life of its own. It was as if the cabin itself was aware of my fear, feeding off it, twisting it, growing hungrier. I pressed the buttons frantically, but they offered no reassurance. No familiar floor numbers, no comforting lobbies. Instead, random symbols lit up, jagged lines, circles intersected with slashes, shapes that made my eyes hurt to look at. I realized with a sinking horror that the elevator was no longer bound to the building I knew. It had become a vessel of something else, something ancient, something patient. Every flicker of light and every hum of the cables seemed to mock me. The reflection returned, but this time it was worse. My face was no longer alone. Behind me, hundreds of figures filled the mirrored walls, some pressing impossibly close, mouths stretching in silent, hungry screams. I could feel their awareness, their longing. One hand reached toward my shoulder, not through the elevator wall, but through the air itself, brushing against me like a whisper of ice. I spun around, but there was nothing there. I was trapped in a space where the laws of the physical world no longer applied, a twisted corridor of overlapping realities that warped with every heartbeat. Then came the whispering. At first, it was just murmurs, almost drowned out by my own frantic breathing. "Why are you here? This is not for you. You should not exist in this space." The words grew louder, more insistent, each one curling around my mind like a snake. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, feeling my sanity fray. The elevator lurched upward and downward unpredictably, each motion sending me crashing against the walls. The mirrored surfaces became windows into other floors, other versions of the office building, each more distorted and decayed than the last. I saw myself at a desk, typing furiously, but my eyes were hollow, my mouth sewn shut. Desperation clawed at me. I needed a plan, anything. I pressed the emergency button again, willing it to bring help, but the speaker emitted only that same whisper, "You cannot leave. You have been chosen. The last ride claims all who wander alone." Panic surged. I realized this was not a malfunctioning elevator. It was a predator, ancient and malevolent, preying on the lone and the unaware. Every sound, every flicker of light, every distorted reflection was part of its hunt. A sudden flash of motion caught my attention. Through the mirrored walls, I glimpsed a figure, tall, thin, faceless, moving with impossible grace. It drifted across the reflections, a predator in its element, always just out of reach yet closer than it should have been. My stomach lurched. Every instinct told me to run, but where could I go? The elevator had become a cage, the building a labyrinth, the night itself an extension of the entity stalking me. Then I noticed something horrifying. The faces in the mirrors were not stationary. They moved independently, whispering, clawing, pressing against the thin veil separating me from them. One face, pale and skeletal, pressed directly against my reflection, smiling as if it knew secrets I could not fathom. My pulse thundered in my ears. I tried to look away, but the image seared itself into my mind. I realized then that the elevator was feeding on fear, absorbing it, shaping reality around my terror. Hours, or maybe moments, passed. Time had lost meaning. The elevator shuddered again, and I was thrown to the floor. When I picked myself up, I noticed the numbers had changed again. Not floors this time, but names. Names I recognized, co-workers who had quit, neighbors I barely knew, people who had gone missing. Each name glowed faintly, vibrating like a heartbeat. The whispering returned, now clearly emanating from the walls themselves. "Choose, or join, the last ride." A sudden understanding hit me with gut-wrenching clarity. The elevator didn't just trap people physically. It collected them, absorbed them, twisted them into these reflections, these endless echoes of terror. Those hollow faces weren't ghosts, they were victims, trapped forever between realities, feeding the predator that rode with the midnight hours. I was next. I ran to the corners of the elevator, desperate for any escape, but the cabin seemed to stretch impossibly. I stepped forward, and the floor dropped away beneath me into nothingness. I turned, and the doors were gone. No buttons, no panels, no metal walls, just infinite darkness, a void filled with whispering, shifting shapes. A cold hand gripped my ankle, icy and impossibly strong. I yelped, twisting, but the grip tightened, pulling me downward. I screamed, clawing at the air, at anything solid, but my fingers passed through empty nothing. Then, a light. Soft, pulsing, almost comforting. I crawled toward it, my mind desperate for hope, for anything that resembled salvation. As I drew near, I realized it was the faint glow of another elevator. The doors slid open as I approached, revealing the same cramped interior, but something was different. Inside, a figure waited. Another person. A co-worker, perhaps. My instincts screamed relief, but the figure's face was obscured by shadow. It smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, and I realized with horror that it was not human. The doors closed behind me before I could react. The elevator moved, silent this time, almost serene in its motion. But serenity was a trap. I felt it in my bones, the same predatory awareness, the same endless hunger. The figure in the corner tilted its head, as if curious, examining me. The whispering returned, "You belong to the ride now. You always have." My heart raced, and I tried to speak, but no words came. My voice was gone, swallowed by the space between realities. The elevator jolted violently, and the walls melted into shadows. I glimpsed fleeting images, versions of the building overrun with darkness, stairwells filled with screaming faces, lobbies dripping with unnatural light. Each glimpse was a warning, a hint of the horrors that awaited anyone foolish enough to ride alone. I realized I was not the first, and I would not be the last. The entity that inhabited the elevator had been patient for decades, maybe centuries, claiming the lonely, the careless, the unaware. Hours, or lifetimes, later, I collapsed into a corner, exhausted, mind fraying. The figure approached slowly, each step deliberate, silent on the metal floor. It extended a hand, not to harm, but to invite. And in a moment of twisted clarity, I understood, resistance was futile. The elevator demanded participation. It thrived on fear, on submission, on the knowledge that no one could escape the last ride. I reached toward it, my hand trembling, and the cabin shifted again. I saw the reflections once more, dozens, hundreds, pressed against the walls, mouths moving in silent screams, eyes wide with eternal terror. And then, as my fingers touched the figures, the cabin jolted, lights flashing violently. I felt myself pulled into the reflection, into the faces, into the endless void of the ride itself. The elevator stopped. Or perhaps it never did. Somewhere, far away, in a world that still obeyed normal rules, the lobby remained empty. The clock ticked toward midnight. And somewhere, deep within the metal and the shadows, the last ride waited for the next soul foolish enough to step inside alone. I awoke, or perhaps I didn't. Time had no meaning here. The sense of past, present, and future was tangled into one endless, suffocating moment. The elevator cabin had shifted again. The polished metal walls were gone, replaced by a mirrored abyss that reflected not me, but countless versions of myself, each frozen in a moment of terror. Some screamed silently, others stared blankly, their eyes hollow and unseeing. I could feel the weight of their fear pressing against me, suffocating, demanding attention, demanding acknowledgement. I realized with a shiver that they were not just reflections, they were echoes of past victims, trapped forever in this looping nightmare. Panic surged. I pounded on the walls, desperate for any exit, but the mirrors rippled under my hands, like liquid glass, and the images multiplied. The faceless figure from before appeared in every reflection, its presence constant, patient, unblinking. It tilted its head, watching, waiting for me to succumb. And I felt it, not behind me, not in front, but inside me. The elevator didn't just trap bodies. It invaded minds, feeding on fear, twisting perception, eroding sanity. I stumbled backward, tripping over nothing, landing hard on the cold, reflective floor. In the mirrors, my other selves mimicked my movements with a horrifying delay, their faces twisting into expressions I didn't make. A whispering chorus rose around me, growing louder, more insistent. "The last ride never ends. The last ride is yours. The last ride is hungry." My ears rang, my head throbbed, and I realized with a sickening clarity that I had been here before. Maybe not physically, but my mind felt trapped in an eternal loop, recalling countless nights of isolation and dread, all feeding this malevolent machine. I scrambled to my feet and ran toward a faint glow at the far end of the cabin. It pulsed gently, like a heartbeat, offering hope, or perhaps deception. As I approached, the elevator floor seemed to ripple, stretching beneath my steps, bending reality into a tunnel of shadows and light. The walls stretched endlessly, lined with more faces, pale and desperate, reaching, clawing, begging silently. One reached toward me, its hand passing through the air with impossible fluidity. I recoiled, heart hammering, and realized it was not asking, it was demanding. Then I heard it. Not a whisper, but a voice, deep and resonant, vibrating in my chest. "You belong to the ride. You are chosen." It was neither male nor female, neither living nor dead, yet somehow aware, intelligent, patient. My vision blurred as the walls twisted, the faces in the mirrors pressing closer. Some were screaming silently, others grinning in horrifying anticipation. And among them, the faceless figure moved with deliberate intent, circling, watching, studying. I could feel its hunger, not physical but psychological, a predatory awareness that made my blood run cold. Desperation overcame me. I pounded on the elevator walls, hoping to shatter them, to break through, to find something real. Instead, the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like the chest of a living beast. Shadows coalesced into shapes, forming corridors that led nowhere, twisting endlessly. Every step I took seemed to loop back, bringing me face to face with more versions of myself, each screaming silently, each trapped, each warning me of what would happen if I faltered. I tried the emergency button once more. This time, instead of whispers, the speaker emitted a guttural, inhuman laugh that rattled my bones. The elevator shuddered violently, and the symbols on the control panel rearranged themselves, jagged, ever-changing, impossible to interpret. One symbol pulsed brighter than the rest. A crooked circle intersected with a slash, glowing with unnatural intensity. Compelled by a mix of fear and instinct, I pressed it. Instantly, the elevator jerked, tilting, spinning, and the cabin dissolved into darkness. I was falling, or maybe floating, through a void of shadows and light, surrounded by screaming reflections and reaching hands. The faceless figure appeared again, drifting beside me, silent but insistent, guiding me through the darkness. Every instinct told me to resist, but the pull was irresistible. The elevator was alive, sentient, and it demanded cooperation, demanded submission. When the cabin finally reformed, I found myself on a floor that looked like the office building I had left, but wrong. Subtle things were off, the carpet was darker, the lights flickered in unnatural patterns, the desks were warped, and the air smelled faintly of decay. I thought I could escape, could reach the stairwell, but shadows slithered across the floor, wrapping around furniture, pooling like ink. The faceless figure was there, waiting, and the whispers returned, echoing from every corner. "You cannot leave. The last ride claims all who wander alone." I moved cautiously, heart racing, trying to ignore the whispering chorus. Each step felt like wading through molasses, each breath a struggle against the oppressive air. Then I noticed something horrifying. The reflections in the office windows didn't match reality. They showed other floors, other versions of the building, some ruined, some flooded, some burning. And in each, there were countless versions of me, trapped, screaming silently, reaching out for salvation I could not provide. A sudden sound, a metallic scrape, made me spin around. The elevator doors had appeared at the end of the hallway. Relief surged, but it was fleeting. Through the glass, I could see more faceless figures, lined up in perfect rows, waiting. Their presence was suffocating, a reminder that the ride was endless, a predator lying in wait for the next soul foolish enough to enter alone. I hesitated, torn between hope and terror. Then, without warning, the doors opened. Inside, the cabin looked normal again, or as normal as it could be in this twisted reality. I stepped in cautiously, pressing the lobby button with trembling fingers. The elevator shuddered, lights flickering violently, and I felt the awareness of the entity intensify. It was watching me, testing me, feeding on my fear. The walls pulsed slightly, as if breathing, and I realized with sickening clarity, the elevator didn't just transport, it consumed, it trapped, it transformed. As we moved, the mirrors returned, reflecting endless versions of myself, each one screaming silently, each one a warning. The faceless figure appeared in every reflection, always observing, always patient. I tried to close my eyes, tried to will myself away, but there was no escape. The elevator was infinite, and I was becoming part of its eternal rhythm. The descent continued, slower now, deliberate, giving me time to feel every second of my terror. I understood then that this was not a machine malfunction, not a trick of the mind. It was a ritual, an ancient cycle. The elevator hunted, and the lone rider was the sacrifice. My fear, my panic, my desperate hope, they were fuel. And the last ride never ends. Finally, the indicator stopped. Lobby. My heart leapt, but the doors slid open to reveal not the familiar lobby, but a twisted, shadowed version of it. Furniture was warped, lights flickered with unnatural colors, and shadows stretched impossibly long. The whispers became voices, clear now, mocking, hungry. "Welcome to the ride, forever." And then I realized the truth. No one leaves the last ride. Not really. The elevator waits, patient, for the next soul who dares step inside alone at midnight. And somewhere, deep within the metal and mirrors, the entity smiles, eternal, hungering, ready to claim the next passenger. I had begun to lose track of time, or maybe time itself had abandoned me. The twisted lobby stretched endlessly in every direction, a labyrinth of familiar shapes warped beyond recognition. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, bouncing off invisible walls, while shadows crept along the edges of my vision, disappearing whenever I tried to focus. The whispering had grown into a chorus, chanting in countless tones, some pleading, some mocking, all incomprehensible yet unmistakably directed at me. You belong to the ride. You belong to the ride. Desperation surged. I ran blindly, weaving through distorted hallways, my hands brushing warped furniture that seemed to shift and breathe beneath my touch. Every turn revealed more of the impossible architecture, doors that led to nowhere, stairwells looping back on themselves, windows opening into darkness instead of the city outside. And always, lurking in the periphery, the faceless figure followed, drifting silently, patient, omnipresent. I tried the emergency exits, trying to force doors open, but they either vanished into shadow or led me back to the same warped lobby. The elevator itself had disappeared, or perhaps it was always there, hidden, waiting for the moment it could reclaim me. I realized with growing horror that I was not in control. The elevator had become a dimension unto itself, a predator shaping reality to trap its prey. Every hallway, every room, every reflection reinforced a single truth: there was no escape for the lone rider. Then I heard it, a sound distinct from the whispers. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the warped space. They weren't my own. I froze, heart hammering. The faceless figure emerged from the shadows, not moving toward me this time, but standing perfectly still, as if measuring, calculating. The shadows around it twisted and writhed like living things, responding to its presence. I understood then that this entity was not just a guardian of the ride. It was the ride itself, a sentient force feeding on fear, shaping the environment to its will. I backed away, pressing against a wall that seemed to pulse under my touch. The reflections returned, hundreds of versions of myself, some screaming silently, some frozen in terror, others with eyes black and hollow, staring directly at me. And in each reflection, the faceless figure loomed, always watching, always patient. I felt my mind fray under the weight of their gaze, the weight of their endless suffering. Panic clawed at me. I needed a plan. I needed anything. In a moment of clarity, I remembered the elevator's first buttons, the symbols that had appeared before. I ran toward the place where the last elevator had appeared, hoping, praying, that it would return, that I could ride again and somehow reach the real world. But the floor rippled beneath my feet like liquid. Shadows rose to meet me, reaching, clawing, whispering in voices that were almost human, almost familiar. I stumbled, nearly falling, and in the brief seconds I was on the ground, I felt the faceless figure's presence wrap around me, suffocating, oppressive, yet not touching me directly. A sudden pulse of light erupted from the center of the warped lobby. It was the elevator, or at least, a version of it. The doors opened, black as a void, promising escape or perhaps further horror. I ran toward it, diving inside before I could think. The doors slammed shut behind me, sealing me in once more. The cabin shuddered violently, and I pressed the button for the lobby, desperate, terrified, pleading silently with fate. The elevator began its motion, but not downward. It twisted, turning, spinning through impossibly narrow corridors that should not have existed. The mirrors returned, reflecting endless versions of myself, some laughing, some crying, all trapped in cycles of despair. The faceless figure drifted beside me in every reflection, watching, observing, measuring my fear. I felt its hunger directly this time, a presence in my chest, a weight pressing against my ribs, tightening with every heartbeat. Hours, or days, passed. The cabin jerked, spun, and twisted through spaces that defied logic. Every floor was a reflection, every reflection a trap. And then I heard them, the others. Voices, distant but clear, calling my name, pleading, screaming. They were the lost, the victims of the last ride, trapped forever in the folds of this dimension. Some whispered warnings, some begged for help, some laughed in madness. I wanted to answer, to comfort, to escape with them, but the cabin seemed to absorb every sound, twisting it into the endless chorus of fear that fed the elevator. I realized then that my mind was fraying. The boundaries between self and reflection, reality and nightmare, were dissolving. My own thoughts no longer felt like mine. Fear was no longer a reaction. It was a tool, a fuel, shaping the cabin, shaping me. I saw myself in the mirrors, my reflection smiling back at me with a cruel mockery. My body felt weightless, my hands trembled, and I understood that I was being absorbed, integrated into the ride, becoming one with the endless loop of terror. Suddenly, a new floor appeared on the indicator, unknown. The doors slid open to a room bathed in crimson light, the walls pulsing as if alive. Shadows writhed across the surfaces, forming grotesque faces that screamed silently. The faceless figure stood in the center, arms outstretched, welcoming me. I wanted to flee, but my legs wouldn't obey. Every fiber of my being screamed to resist, yet I felt the pull of the ride, the inevitability of being claimed. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening chorus. You belong, the last ride, forever. I stumbled forward, drawn toward the figure, toward the light, toward the unknown. My mind flared with one last desperate thought. If I could confront it, perhaps I could break free. But as I reached out, the cabin twisted violently, the mirrors shattering into shards of darkness that pierced my consciousness like knives. Pain and fear exploded through me, and I screamed, not for myself, but for all those trapped, all those who had come before, all those who would come after. And then, silence. The elevator doors opened once more. The cabin was empty, pristine, normal. For a fleeting moment, I thought I had escaped. The lobby lay before me, familiar and safe, or so it seemed. But in the mirrored surface of the elevator doors, I caught a glimpse of something that froze me in place. My reflection was not mine alone. Hundreds of faces pressed against the glass, eyes hollow, mouths silent but screaming. And the faceless figure stood behind them, smiling. I understood then, with bone-deep terror, that there was no escape. The elevator waits, patient, eternal, for the next soul foolish enough to take the last ride alone at midnight. And I, whether body, mind, or memory, had become part of it. The lobby stretched before me, impossibly vast, bathed in an eerie half-light that made every shadow seem alive. I had survived the twisting corridors, the reflections, the whispers, but I knew instinctively that the ride was far from over. Every step I took echoed unnaturally, bouncing off walls that shouldn't exist. I had become hyper-aware of the silence between sounds, the pauses where shadows moved independently, the air itself shifting as if it had a mind of its own. The faceless figure had vanished, but I could feel it everywhere, in the corners of my vision, in the pressure on my chest, in the whispering of my own thoughts. I moved cautiously, seeking an exit, a door, a stairwell, anything that could lead back to reality. The elevator doors loomed ahead, familiar and terrifying. I approached slowly, and for a brief moment, hope flared. Maybe this was it. Maybe I could leave. But as I reached for the handle, I caught my reflection in the polished metal. It was not my own alone. Hundreds of faces pressed against the glass behind me, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. And in the center, the faceless figure tilted its head, smiling. The truth hit me like a physical blow. I was already part of the ride. Even if I escaped the cabin, the elevator's reach extended far beyond its walls. I tore myself away from the mirror, sprinting through the warped lobby. Hallways twisted impossibly, doors appeared and vanished at random, shadows stretched and contracted like living things. I could hear whispers calling my name, urgent, desperate, mocking. And through it all, a low, resonant vibration pulsed beneath my feet, the heartbeat of the elevator itself, waiting, patient, eternal. Then I saw it, a stairwell, descending into darkness. My first instinct was relief. Stairs meant control, meant solid ground, meant the possibility of escape. I dashed toward it, ignoring the shadows that clawed at my ankles, the whispers that sought to turn me back. Each step felt heavy, surreal, as if the air itself resisted my movement. The deeper I went, the colder it became, until my breath frosted in front of me, and the whispering grew frantic, angry, desperate. At the bottom, I found a door. It looked ordinary, metal, painted a dull gray, with a simple push bar. My hand shook as I pushed it open. The air smelled of rain, earth, and something darker I couldn't name. I stumbled outside, onto the street, into the familiar city night. For a moment, relief flooded me. The buildings, the streetlights, the distant hum of traffic, they were real. I was free. But the relief was fleeting. In the reflection of a rain-soaked puddle, I saw it. My reflection, but not my own. Hundreds of faces pressed against the surface of the puddle, mouths open in silent screams. And behind them, the faceless figure, grinning as if it had been waiting for me all along. A shiver ran down my spine. The whispers returned, faint at first, then louder. The last ride never ends, never alone. I realized then the terrifying truth. Escape was an illusion. The elevator had claimed me, not my body alone, but my mind, my essence, my very soul. I had survived physically, yes, but a part of me remained trapped in the ride, forever a passenger in its endless predatory cycle. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it pulling at me, drawing me back. Every reflection, every shadow, every whisper reminded me, the ride was eternal, and I was its unwilling passenger. I stumbled down the street, desperate to convince myself it was over. But the shadows moved differently now, stretching toward me, brushing against the edges of my vision. Faces appeared in windows, in puddles, in reflective surfaces, watching, whispering. The city was no longer a safe space. The elevator's reach had extended beyond the building, beyond reality itself. I was never truly alone, and the last ride never truly ends. Days passed, or perhaps weeks, but I could not be certain. Every night, I avoided elevators, avoided reflections, avoided silence. And yet, I felt it, always, in the corner of my mind, waiting. Occasionally, I would see a familiar flash in a mirror, a shadow too quick to belong to any human. And I knew, the elevator waits. It is patient. It is eternal. And it will claim the next soul foolish enough to ride alone at midnight. Even now, as I speak these words, a part of me is still in the cabin. The last ride is never empty. And someday, someone else will step inside, unaware of the waiting darkness, unaware that a single solitary ride can twist forever into nightmare. I know the warning, and I pass it on: never take the last elevator ride alone at midnight. Because the ride does not forget. And it does not forgive. The city sleeps, unaware. The building hums quietly in the night. And somewhere, in the depths of metal, shadow, and reflection, the elevator waits, patient, eternal, hungering.